I'm Jamie Stalcup, managing editor of TV Reel, and I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Wildstar Films' Mark Linfield and Vanessa Berlowitz, executive producers of National Geographic's Underdogs, as well as Ryan Reynolds, who narrates the series. To start things off, where did the idea for Underdogs originate?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's in a sense, it's been a very long time in the making because Vanessa and I have spent 30 years traveling the world for things like Planet Earth and Frozen Planet, filming all these big polar bears and lions and tigers, and all the while, the animals that often most interested us were the little diminutive little things living in the shadows, and they often had big personalities and amazing superpowers, but they were kind of also a bit gross and under rocks.
Not part of the story that it's
So we've been
script,
sort of
yeah.
collecting these stories, and all of the team at Wildstar we work with have also been collecting these stories over the years, and we just thought it was time to do something really, really different from the run of the mill. Because I don't know about you, but we all feel like those other wildlife shows are great, but they're watched by the same people, and they're often the same animals and the same stories, but over the years with more resolution or different kits. But it's sort of feeling a little similar, some of it. And so we just wanted something which was different animals, really different tone,
Broke them all.
broke them all, and
Yeah.
partly because we really want a new audience for wildlife, different people that don't ordinarily watch natural history.
We're also excited to innovate with storytelling and find new voices for nature. There's been one incredible voice, David Attenborough, and certainly in the
mm,
UK, a few others that have sort of dominated the style and tone. But we thought, wouldn't it be great to find a new voice that brings in comedic storytelling? And actually, once we kind of came up with the idea, we were going, well, who is the best comedic actor that has huge reach to young audiences that also champions the underdog and the unsung hero?
So of
Ryan
course, being
Reynolds.
being big Deadpool fans, that was fairly easy. It
Yeah.
had to be Ryan. And then there's an amazing bit of happenstance, really, because our agents are the same as Ryan's agent. So we're talking to the about this idea with our agents, and of course, we said Ryan would be fantastic, but he'd never do it. And they went, well, he actually might. He's on our books. Let's sort of put it to him. And so we sent Ryan the sizzle, and he absolutely loved it, and even voiced before we'd even sold it, he voiced the sizzle for us from his trailer when he was on set for a different show.
Acting for Deadpool.
And we just dropped his words onto the sizzle, and it came to life. And actually from that moment, he was completely on board with his company, Maximum Effort. And then National Geographic came on board as well. But from that point, really, we've had quite a different production experience because we often bring the voice talent in at the end, having finished the picture. But
Right.
Ryan and his company were with us all the way through
We
this.
co-developed and
Kind of,
co-evolved
they
it.
evolved the story.
Yeah.
And even when Ryan would do the commentaries, he would sort of riff in the booth. And if we really liked it and there wasn't space for it, we would recut the show to include some of his more kind of outlandish, kind of crazy riffs. So no, it's been a different process and a really good co-development really from the outset.
And Ryan, in your own words, how did you find out about the project and what made you feel like you had to be a part of it?
I found out about it through a producer at Maximum Effort, my company, Sophia Travaglia, and I she kind of pitched me this sort of main theme or the idea of it, and it sort of was right up my alley. I mean, it just felt like a prescription from a doctor that I desperately needed. So it was a project that was born of kind of joy and aiming for a feeling more than anything, And I always find that the movies that I'm a part of that work are usually aiming for a feeling more so than just a plot.
You capture the behavior of creatures of every imaginable size and in every imaginable environment. I mean, you go from glass frogs in South American rainforests to fungus gnats in caves to pistol shrimp underwater. Tell me about the arsenal of technology used to get all of these animals and their behavior on camera.
Well, it's a good question actually, because it's an unusual cast compared to a normal natural history show, partly because they're mostly smaller than usual. If you're going for these underdog animals, they tend to be kind of little. And that involves different technology. So, there's all sorts of stuff that's evolved, and we've evolved over the last 2 or 3 years for the show, that is incredibly useful for filming animals down at their level, so you can really get into their characters, because you want to get into their world, even see their horizon, and obviously connect with their eyes at their level. So we've been using tiny miniaturized cameras. We've been having them on robotic arms that can sort of follow, for example, velvet worms through the undergrowth, tracking with them. We've been using kind of newly designed macro lenses, which again really place you in their world and allow you to kind of unlock their characters. And actually, the new style of lights we were just discussing, lights for filming tiny things used to be very, very hot, because you need a nice big bright light, and the very old style lights would burn the animals. It just
you couldn't
just
even
couldn't
begin to film them.
No, and now these animals are cold. I'm sorry, the animals are cold. The lights are cold, which means the animals behave as natural underneath them. And so there's just so many sort of technological innovations that have helped us to film these little critters.
And Ryan Reynolds is phenomenal, but what is also phenomenal about this series is the music, with composition from the talented Harry Gregson Williams, as well as an original theme song from Green Day, which is pretty unique for a wildlife program. Tell me how the music for the series came together and how the style of music fits with the narrative of the series.
So glad you liked and enjoyed the music. We are really pleased with how fresh and different it sounds from other natural history shows. We wanted to borrow from a bit with how kind of comedic drama and big Marvel films are done, where you have that kind of mixture of epic score, but then also commercial needle drop, where people get that moment of recognition with the song and they can really kind of connect to the character. So Harry Gregson Williams is a fantastic, he's brilliant, one of the top composers in Hollywood. We're very fortunate to have worked with him on other wildlife features that we've done. Also very hard to get, because he does things like Gladiator 2 and The Martian and Shrek. But we happened to have a direct relationship and showed him the sizzle. He loved it. He basically said, I want to do this show. I want to kind of score for Ryan. He loved the whole premise. And because he's so experienced with animation, and things like the Shrek franchise, he's also worked on all the Wallace and Gromits. He's really brilliant at giving a musical voice to the characters and really kind of reading their story and bringing them to life. So he really added a huge amount of storytelling in the music and characterization. And then to the sort of icing on the cake was to have Ryan, we were like, okay, what are we going to do with the title sequence? And it was Ryan's idea to get Green Day on. Now, of course, you and I couldn't just ring up Green Day, but he's friends with them, and he called up the band, played them some clips, they loved it, and then they created that amazing track, which they've also released as part of their new album, Saviors.
They were so keen to do it, actually. They even finished the track for us before we'd even done a contract for them.
Yeah, we were like, oh guys, you haven't been paid. They just did it. So I mean, I hope you agree, it's a really catchy tune, and it really kind of sums up, hopefully, the feel of the series. And what we're really hoping is that this series will get to teenagers and young kids, and it will appeal to adults too, because it's got that kind of double humor. It will go over the heads of some kids, but hopefully adults will also laugh. And the Green Day song, we think, is perfect for, just signifying that this is something different and fun.
Ryan, Vanessa, and Mark say it was your idea to bring Green Day on board. What a phenomenal idea. How did that even come to you? And how did you go about getting the band on board?
Well, through kind of a weird channel. I wouldn't, not your typical way of, getting access to a band as iconic as Green Day, but I was sitting in a place called Petersham Nurseries in London, and it was during the strike, the actors' strike and the writers' strike. And I was just thinking about how to bookend Deadpool and Wolverine. There was this huge 20th Century Fox logo embedded into the ground, and I really just wanted to cap that off somehow. So I thought about this idea of an homage, sort of feeling like a short sort of homage to the past instead of the future, which everyone was expecting this movie to enter the MCU and, you know, play with those characters. But instead, it was a real nod to the past where we all came from. But then Good Riddance came on the radio that was just floating in the air. And I just like got emotional. I mean, I don't think you can listen to that song and not get emotional. And I just fell in love with it. And then we licensed it for the film. And I don't normally do this, but I called them just to say like, thanks for saying yes. And thanks. It was like cheating. You could film my colonoscopy and set it to that song and you'd be weeping. So I really just was very grateful to them. And I struck up a bit of a friendship with Billy Joe. And then he came to Wrexham to watch a match at Wrexham AFC in Wales. And we just been buddies ever since. And, you know, and then he said yes to this. I was like, what? Okay, well, let's spend some of that Disney money on exactly this.
It's perfect. I can't think of a better music partner for this series specifically.
Yeah, it's right at that intersection of like punk rock, but joy.
Now, you've done plenty of voice work before, but how different was narrating for this wildlife series versus voicing an animated character or reading for an audiobook, etc.?
Well, you get much more leeway to have a kind of running editorial, and I love that. I mean, just kind of that lizard brain, free flowing kind of thing where you're working with people that you feel really safe and comfortable with, that you can just kind of go like a geyser. You know, and I always, when I pitch something too, I always make sure that it's safe to pitch, because you know you don't ever want people like yesing you just because you're pitching it. So I even, no matter what I'm working on, if I'm writing a screenplay or if I'm doing this, I always start with, here's the bad version. What if we did this, this, and this? And then that now just invites dissent. So it was just a great group where we all felt like comfortable to pitch anything and everything, no matter how preposterous. And there's so many of these animals that are just preposterous. I mean, that you cannot believe exist. So it was such a thrill. It was one of those, and it's also a show that I can't wait for my kids to get to watch, because we finished National Geographic this year, pretty much. We literally watched everything.
And you are obviously a seasoned actor and producer. You've been in the business a long time. But is there anything you learned working on this wildlife program or working with Nat Geo specifically that you'll bring with you into future endeavors?
Well, I think it's like understanding your limits, to be honest. I was editing with Sean Levy, and I were editing Deadpool and Wolverine while I was also recording this at the beginning, and I was not good. So I redid it all because I was so cooked. So then I redid it all. We put a pin in everything, and I came back to it once I was done the bulk of the editing with Sean, and I had so much more energy and enthusiasm. And I really fell in love with it. And you know, you fall in love with something if you sort of at first have this kind of intense experience with it that maybe isn't what you had hoped for or wanted. And then you really kind of see it for what it really is. And I just couldn't stop. We all cried when we finished. That never happens when we finished the last episode, because it was such a treat. It was just such a fun world of mischief to play in. And I love National Geographic and what they do from just an aesthetic point of view. I just love like finishing a day instead of watching a crime drama, like watching Mother Nature at its best and at its worst.
And you've sort of answered my last question already, but ultimately, what are you hoping viewers take away from watching Underdogs?
Just that there are so many more animals, and there's so much more diversity out there in nature than they'll ever have seen, you know, from perhaps watching most mainstream shows. I think the thing that's going to surprise them is if these people, these viewers, are actually new to wildlife. You know, if they're coming because of Ryan, they're coming because of the humor, and then it'll all be new and all be fresh. But I think ultimately, I hope our kind of fascination for these creatures has kind of come through in the sequence.
It's not all about the lions and the polar
No.
bears. You know, we hope that, you know, how in kids like bedrooms they'll have a fluffy lion or a tiger. We hope after this series they'll be having like fluffy naked mole rats or
I think,
glass
a good
frogs.
point is a lot of these animals, the kind of the slugs and some of the weird critters, and lots of these stories are about animals that people find in their local woodlands or in their
Yeah.
garden. And
Yeah.
wildlife isn't something that happens on an African savanna. It's something that happens, in your little patch of woodland, and it's worth looking after.
But we tend to focus on the apex predators, in the world, and I would certainly characterize humans as that as well. But there's, the adaptability of species is phenomenal. I mean, their ability to do things that we might consider completely insane or gross to survive should never be underestimated. And I think it's a real sort of tale of like hope, I think, for people who feel like maybe they're a little invisible in their life, or maybe they're sort of like have yet to kind of manifest exactly what it is that they want. You watch these little guys survive some of the most horrendous situations, and you just can't help but sort of feel like anything's possible.
Well, it is such a unique, fun series, and it will bring in a new audience. But even as, for people who watch wildlife films and series regularly, it's still so fascinating to
Well,
see
that's
these
great to
creatures we
hear.
never get to see, and in such a
Yeah.
comedic, fun, unique tone. So thank you for making it, and thank you for giving me a behind the scenes look today.